Under oath and off the rails. That is really the only way to describe the 4 hours of extraordinary testimony that was wild even by the standards of Donald Trump. The former president repeatedly got into it with the judge who will decide his fate at this civil fraud trial, beginning really just minutes after he took the stand. At one point, Judge Arthur Engoron threatened to dismiss Trump from the witness stand, warning him not to give speeches when he was being asked direct questions, yes or no questions. At one point, the judge noted, quote, "This is not a political rally." He even urged Trump's lawyers who were sitting there in the courtroom to intervene, saying, quote, "I beseech you to control him if you can. If you can't, I will." It was only when Trump walked out of the courtroom after a break that was ordered by the judge to have a conversation with Trump and his attorneys that he zipped his lips. And I'm being literal here. He made the gesture to reporters. He went back in the courtroom after that. And later, when his testimony did finally wrap, he had this to say.
I think it went very well. I think you were there and you listened and you see what a scam this is. This is a case that should have never been brought. The fraud was on behalf of the court. I think you saw what I had to say today, and it was very conclusive. Everything we did was absolutely right.
The courts did not agree. They actually ruled otherwise because the judge, who is the decision maker here, there is no jury that was in the courtroom today. There's no jury in this entire case. They have already found Trump, his adult sons, and the company here, the Trump Organization, liable for persistent fraud, inflating the value of assets in order to get more favorable loans. There were key moments that stood out in the chaos today, though, that were important for the Attorney General's case, including when Trump acknowledged helping put together the financial documents that are at the heart of the matter. When he was asked whether he had maintained accurate books and records from 2014, he told the court, quote, "I hope so." I'm joined now by former Superior Court Judge LaDoris Hazard Cordell and former federal prosecutor and CNN senior legal analyst Ellie Honig. And Judge, I am so glad you are here with me. It's kind of perfect timing for what happened today. I mean, when the judge has to tell the defense counsel to control their client, how far out of the scope of what usually happens is that?
Well, first of all, the Trump show notwithstanding, the only important person in that entire courtroom, it was not Trump, it was the judge. There's no jury here. The judge is the finder of the facts, and the facts are determined by documentary evidence that the judge finds relevant and also testimony from witnesses whom the judge finds are credible. And Donald Trump did very little, if anything, to bolster his credibility with this judge. So today, Trump's responses were inconsistent, incoherent. They were incriminating, they were irritating, and they were insulting. So when you take all of that together, this judge really had a lot on his hands. And there are some people, by the way, who say, why didn't the judge rein him in? Trump was insulting the judge. He was ranting, doing all kinds of things. And I think the judge played it right because this was a court trial. If this had been a jury, the judge would have had his hands full. He would have had to do everything he could to keep the jurors from being distracted from the facts. But this is just the judge. This judge has been on the bench a long time. He's in his 70s, just as Trump is in his 70s, and he's a New Yorker. So he gets people, and he understands that he's got to look at the facts only. So what this judge did was, he let a lot of the stuff slide, and in my view, it was the right thing to do to get through the day and to get the facts, because in the end, that he makes the decision about the future of the Trump brand. And Trump identifies only through his extraordinary wealth. And if that falls apart, then Trump is a nobody. No one has any reason to even listen to him. The only reason he's even out there is because of this so-called extraordinary wealth.
Well, and of course, he's running for president, and this is what helped propel him to the White House in 2016. I think that's why he's so angry personally about it. That's what we hear from sources. Yeah. And Ellie, there was so much chaos in that courtroom today. It was kind of unbelievable. But there were key moments where Trump seemed to have acknowledgments or admissions that could be helpful to the Attorney General's case.
Yeah, so through all the drama and the spectacle, this really was a debacle in substance. I agree with the judge for Donald Trump. And there were a couple key moments that stood out to me where Donald Trump really made important concessions. First of all, One of the things I was wondering going in is he going to defend these valuations? Is he going to say, no, we actually got it right when we said Mar-a-Lago was worth $500 million? Turns out he literally doubled down. He said, no, that's actually worth $1 billion, which is a surprising legal tack. The other thing he did was he simultaneously tried to distance himself from the valuations. He said, we're going to bring in the very big bankers. Okay, I guess he's saying these people from Mazars, these accountants are going to come in and explain it. But in another really key point, to me, the most important sentence of the day, Trump said something like, I saw those statements, I reviewed them, and at times I gave input. And it was a quick little moment. But that's something that I think the AG's office is going to latch onto because he acknowledges he knew them and he knew enough to even give input into those statements. So I agree with you. I think his testimony was inherently contradictory and a mess. But there's some real useful pieces in there for the AG's office.
Were there any parts of his testimony, based on what you said, you think the judge made the right call and how he was acting, but are there any parts where, some were questioning, is this a strategy by Trump? Can they say, well, look, the judge is biased against me, look at this. Yeah. Do you see any grounds for that?
Yeah, well, first of all, I don't think what Trump did was a strategy. This is who this man is. He cannot control himself. He cannot control what comes out of his mouth. And so much of it was incoherent. At one point, he was asked about a deficit on a piece of property in 2013, and his response was to attack Letitia James and say she's taking property like that China does, like they do in China in the communist country. It makes no sense at all. This is who he is. So I don't think it's a strategy. The strategy that's needed is for his lawyers to figure out how in the world to deal with a client that they cannot control and cannot rein in.
I mean, his lawyers, though, weren't even really trying. I mean, Chris Kise was praising his answers as brilliant. When he came out at the end, I was standing on the steps and he said that Trump was one of the best witnesses that he has represented in his 30 years. Do you think he really feels that way?
No, I don't. I mean, there's been a notable shift, by the way, in Chris Kise's tone. Have you noticed this? I mean, his prior filings were pretty down the middle, pretty straightforward. But one thing you are taught as a prosecutor, as a litigator, a judge knows this, is you always keep a poker face. You always act like you're winning in front of the judge, in front of the jury. There's no jury here, in front of the media. Because what are you going to do? Hang your head, sulk? What is Chris Kise going to do? Come out and say, oh, my God, that was a disaster, right? He has to act like it went well for the cameras, for his client. But no, he can't possibly. He's a good lawyer. He can't possibly believe that went well today.
I mean, how do you think the judge responds to that? Because there was also a lot of back and forth just between the judge and mainly Chris Kise, other attorneys, where he did tell them to sit down. He asked them to explain the rules to Trump when they took that 10-minute break.
Yeah. So, I mean, I was a trial court judge for almost 20 years, and I had belligerent lawyers and I had, angry defendants. Nothing, however, like this. And there was some reporting about the judges, even the nonverbal behavior. At some point, he was looking at the ceiling. He shook his head when Trump was talking about evaluation of Mar-a-Lago. And so what that says is that judges are human beings. We're human beings, and we have feelings. And hearing all of this, this judge, I think, remarkably contained himself sufficiently enough to be able to get through the day, but also to end up at a point where there's not going to be a mistrial or reversal because of bias. This judge got through it, and he's going to have to get through it again and more. But I do not envy the judges that are coming up that have to preside over jury trials with Donald Trump. They're going to have their hands full.
Do you think this could signal what those are going to look like?
Oh, my gosh. It's a totally different ballgame with the jury in there. You have to protect your jury, as the judge knows. I mean, 90% of this nonsense today would have been shut down immediately. I want to see how you would have handled Donald Trump. That would have been worth seeing.
Oh, I can handle it.
I'm sure you could. But what the judge did today, and I agree with you, Judge, it was smart. He didn't take the bait. He almost said, let him get it out of his system. He can vent. He can rant and rave. It's not going to influence my decision-making as a judge. But when you got a jury there of 12 normal civilians, you have to protect them. You can't let them be exposed to political rants, to extraneous comments. And when we get to that scenario in a few months with the criminal trials, the judges are going to have to exert a lot more control.
Right.
You raise a very good question, and I am curious. Put yourself in Judge Engoron's robe. How would you have handled that today?
Well, sure.
Would you have dismissed him from the stand?
Dismissed him from no. I mean, the object is to have a fair trial. But whether or not I would permit, for example, Trump, at one point, the judge made a ruling. Trump pulled a piece of paper out of his pocket and wanted to read it. And the judge said, that's not happening, no. And Trump's immediate response was shock, meaning, oh, yeah, I'm really shocked at that. Really condescending to writing the judge. And I would not have tolerated that. It's like, and I've had people make comments like that in court, and I'd say, excuse me, Did you say something? I want to make sure the record's clear. So there are ways to deal with it because, Donald Trump, quite frankly, he is a bully and bullies are cowards. So he'll go up to that line. He's not going to go over that line. This is not going to happen. And it takes a judge to be able to be up front and say, you go ahead and go over that line and see what happens.
Well, I'm also curious because the other person who had a large presence today was the Attorney General, Letitia James. We saw her come out and speak before. We also saw her come out and speak afterward. Is that typical behavior for an Attorney General?
No, and I think Letitia James is deserving of some criticism here. First of all, let's be clear. Two things can be true. Donald Trump was involved in a massive fraud, and Letitia James politicized this case. She ran. That's not an opinion. That's a fact. She ran in 2018, vote for me, I'll nail Trump. She fundraised on it. Today, she made brief speeches before and after the testimony. She was tweeting throughout the testimony, saying in her tweets, he's lying. You cannot do that. As an attorney general, she's not acting as a prosecutor here, but she's enforcing the law. You can't tweet to the public while someone's testifying. That's a lie. I don't think that would be tolerated under ordinary circumstances.
Yeah, social media is a problem.
Yeah.
It really is a problem. And I did not know that she was tweeting throughout. I thought the statement she made at the end of the case when she came outside, I thought that was entirely appropriate. She didn't get into any details and basically said, we have a strong case. The numbers are, what they are. I did not know that. And no, social media, it's just so, I think, is such a problem when it comes to handling these trials.
Yeah, we tried to ask her questions. She did not take the bait on those. We'll see. Ellie Honig, Judge Ladorus, Hazard Cordell, so great to have you here in person. Thank you for joining us. Though today was unprecedented in